This is the American Free Enterprise Chamber of Commerce's Presidential Candidate Series on business, an unbiased and informative interview series featuring the U.S. presidential candidates and their vision for the future of America. Business, economy, trade, entrepreneurship. We ask all the questions so you can make an informed decision in 2024.
My name is Gentry and I'm the CEO of the American Free Enterprise Chamber of Commerce. At the AmFree Chamber, we are committed to the very simple idea that free people and competitive markets have led to more progress, more prosperity, more human flourishing than any other set of ideas in all of recorded human history. And yet, we're starting to lose a generational battle in America. That more young voters in this country are flirting with socialism and other kinds of ideas. And it's time for the next generation of American leadership to stand up and remind all of America that if you are for human flourishing, there's one way to get there. We've been there before, we can be there again. And the job of leadership in America, the job of the next president of the United States, I think in part will be to help reinvigorate American free enterprise and pass it off to the next generation in better shape than we find it today. And so we are thrilled to be here at Vermeer tonight. We're thrilled to have this conversation with you, Senator Scott, joining me on the stage and asking a few of these questions. David Oman. David is the only Iowan that has the distinction of serving as chief of staff to two of Iowa's governors, Governor Ray and Governor Branstad. A member of a whole variety of boards, commissions, successful businessman in his own right, a four-time co-chairman of the Republican Party of Iowa. You know, I'll just, if I may, David, say one word about you on this. The reason we still have the Iowa caucuses is the work that people like David Oman and his contemporaries did at the Republican Party. It has kept Iowa vital in the national political conversation, and we wouldn't be here without you. And so, David, with that, please take us away.
Well, Gentry, thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the people who are watching whenever you're watching this video. To all of you here in the shop, thank you for coming out. It's more fun to do these with real people in the room, right, Senator? Absolutely. So let's get started right away. We're here to talk tonight about business, about free enterprise, about how this country works and the engine behind it. So let's talk about your view of the importance of free enterprise and how would a Tim Scott administration ensure that the next generation, this and the following generation, best understands the power of free enterprise to lift everybody up, and you know that story.
Yes, certainly. Hey, thank you both for asking questions. I'm going to go to my left and my right, back and forth for a little while here. But let me just say to the people here, and I like to stand up a little bit. My mama wanted a preacher. She got a politician, so pray for my mama. I like to get a little close because it's just how I am. This is what we do in the South. But let me just simply say this, that free enterprise is so critically important. And in my administration, we would emphasize entrepreneurship. My life was changed by two really important concepts. Number one, my mother taught me that prayer was the key and faith unlocks all doors. I had a mentor, anybody heard of Chick-fil-A? Okay, this is good, praise the Lord. So I had a Chick-fil-A mentor who was a small business owner who taught me that having a job is a good thing, but creating jobs is a better thing. And he said that if you know the difference between an income and a profit, it can change your community. He taught me that as a poor kid growing up in a single-parent household, that I didn't only need to look towards athletics to find my way out of poverty. He says if you start a small business and you succeed, you can actually transform not just your financial life, but the financial life of your mother. And as a poor kid who thought the biggest American dream I could ever pursue was making sure that my mother didn't live in a place where she had to look left and right after she got out the car, that she could drive into a garage that would keep her safe. And that dream became a reality after I started my own small business. So I'm not just a believer that small business, free enterprise, and capitalism transforms not only a life or a nation, but it transformed the world. We redefined poverty because of our free market system. So in my administration, you'd find more emphasis, more focus on making sure that more people have a chance to live their version of the American dream, whether that's home ownership or starting a small business, because when you do so, you find yourself in the best position to see humans flourish based on the ability to win or lose, to fail or succeed at pursuing your own business. That's one of the things. I'm not a big fan of these folks that believe everybody gets a trophy. No participation trophies. You either work hard and succeed, or you fail and you learn.
That's a pretty good start, Senator. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
The Am-Free Chamber, the group sponsoring this conversation tonight, recently conducted a national poll, and it showed that 4 out of 5 Americans are really concerned about inflation. Absolutely. Not really a surprise. So let's talk about a Scott administration.
Absolutely.
What would you do to get inflation under control to have a better long-term future for Americans?
You know, one of the things you have to do is explain why we have inflation as high as we do. The good news is I can tell by the faces here and the reaction to the words I'm speaking that you already get it. When Joe Biden came into office, he turned the federal spending spigot on. When that happened, we saw the raging inflation for 1 month got as high as 9.1%. Over the last 2 years of his administration, it's been the cumulative values around 16%. Well, when inflation goes up, one other thing goes up as well. The Federal Reserve's response to high inflation, according to Jay Powell, is to put downward pressure on our economy. Downward pressure means making it more expensive to do business, more expensive to buy a home, more expensive to buy food, more expensive to buy gas. It comes in a form of interest rates. 11 consecutive interest rate increases in a row, from 0% added 525 basis points, which is a 5.25 on top of where we were. We're now at 7.5, 7.25, and as high as 8% for a mortgage. That means your average first-time home buyer can't get in a house, because under the Biden economy, the devastation can be measured in the interest rate hike. In my administration, the first thing you do is just turn the spigot off. You cannot have an artificially hot economy driven by the government. If you want to have a hot economy, it has to be driven in the private sector. The way we did it in 2017, I was one of the 3 people who wrote the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That Tax Cuts and Jobs Act cut our taxes by $2.4 trillion. With a $2.4 trillion tax cut on the personal side, plus taking the corporate tax from 35% down to 21%, and then we gave a 20% haircut on small businesses. That created the strongest economy we've seen in 50 years. As a result of that strong economy, we had record low unemployment and 2% inflation. So your gas prices, instead of going from $1.99 in South Carolina, December 2020, to $3.40 about these days, we could get it back down to $2. But you can do that by doing 3 things specifically. I call it build, not borrow. We need to quit borrowing from China. We need to quit borrowing from other countries and build more factories, high-tech manufacturing here in America. We need to make sure that we unleash all of our energy resources so that we're not just energy independent, but we are actually energy dominant. That would create nearly 3 million high-paying energy jobs here in America. We can get to 10 million new jobs with inflation as low as 2% and unemployment incredibly low. That's what happens in a Scott administration.
Go ahead. We are on the backside of the COVID pandemic, but not completely. And one of the repercussions of all of that was severe disruptions of the supply chain, domestically and globally. And it's put a spotlight on some of the vulnerabilities of that whole system, and it's put our country at some risk. The global supply chain is critical for the United States, but as you've talked, we've got to bring more of it home. Yes. So how would you deal with the American supply chain process? What changes would you anticipate?
2 things I'd say very quickly. Number 1, COVID is over. Just is. We need to go back to pre-COVID levels of spending. The government should not keep spending money as if we're still in a healthcare crisis. We are not, number one. If we did that, we'd be much better off. My philosophy is that what we learned through COVID is also really important. One lesson we learned is we are way too dependent on other countries for our necessities, whether it's minerals, medicine, microchips, or even our military complex. We are waiting on people to give us permission to build something because we need their manufacturing. That's one of the reasons why I focus on high-tech manufacturing. So if you want to make sure that we have fewer problems with our supply chain, we have to stop focusing purely on supply chain price and start focusing on supply chain resiliency. We have to make sure that we can find the resources we need in our Western alliances if, in fact, we want to break the back of those who are in our way. The only way to do that is to reposition ourselves, recalibrate the system so that we're focusing on making sure that we're making our own medicine. 87% of many of the ingredients that we need for our own medical health, well-being, comes from outside of our country. That's crazy. That's a politically correct word. Crazy. It's just crazy. Number two, if the world is being built on innovation and technology and we have to wait for someone to manufacture the microchips, that's a problem too. The intellectual capital for microchips comes from America. The manufacturing is outside of our country. We need to bring that back home as well. If we were to focus on decoupling our economy from China, we find ourselves in the strongest position to have more of a resilient strength in our own supply chain by finding our allies to work with and building it at home. Without doing that, we will find ourselves again in the same predicament where we're asking for permission to take care of ourselves. I refuse to allow that to be the future of the United States of America.
Let's double down on decoupling.
Yes, sir.
Talk about energy independence.
Absolutely.
How important, I think I know the answer to this, but how important, but let's assume you think it is important to have more American energy, more independence, insulated from foreign governments and foreign supplies. How would you do it?
A couple ways. Number one, we should unleash all of America's energy resources. Not some of them, all of them. We should also set goals in the next 10 years, let's say, to double our nuclear footprint. It's clean, it's cheap, it's reliable. Why not? Anybody here in favor of RFS? Anybody know the biofuels? You like biofuels? You know why? Not only is it good for the state, it's really good for America. One of the ways that we lessen our dependence on foreign oil that comes from dictators, murderers, and tyrants is to blend here at home. It's a strategy. Having toured a plant here in Iowa, I became more acutely aware of the power punch that comes from this great state that is a part of our economic opportunity, but more importantly, our national security necessity. If we are going to be secure as a nation, we can't beg the Middle East for more oil. We certainly shouldn't beg Russia for more oil when we can actually just encourage, incent, and create certainty and predictability here at home. If you have certainty and predictability, the people who have the leases today will go ahead and start excavating for the energy tomorrow. If we worked hard in making sure that our tax code is receptive to more entrepreneurs, more development here at home, we'll get more supply to meet our needs, and I believe we will have an excess supply to meet the needs of our allies around the world.
Senator, let me keep you on energy issues now. There's here at home, one of the things that we see at American Free Enterprise Chamber is that in order to have a robust economy, you have to be able to move people and products efficiently and freely. And yet the Biden administration and the American left more broadly are now going after the internal combustion engine at a rate that I think most Americans don't yet understand. As early as January of 2024, new fleet vehicles cannot be internal combustion engines in the state of California. EPA rules, IRS rules, DOE rules, going after electrification mandates and outright bans on internal combustion engines. As president, how would you address peeling some of these back and helping make this transition in a more sustainable way?
Gentry, when you have as many of the alphabet soup that you just named, the EPA, IRS.
Strike one, strike two.
Exactly. And beyond, the one thing we have to realize is that's the opposite of common sense. People aren't willing to buy the EVs even with amazing tax incentives. When you look at the Obama administration's approach to the Green New Deal, it was a disaster. It was an abysmal failure. So what happens? Biden gets in office, and what does he do? He doubles down and tries it again with higher EV credits. If you're making $800,000 a year, you're making $800,000 a year, ma'am? I heard the last one in front of you. Literally, people make $800,000 a year. They had the opportunity to get a tax credit from the federal government to buy an electric vehicle. Now, that tax credit is paid for by people who make less than $800,000 a year. I find that kind of puzzling. Why would we put on the shoulders of people working paycheck to paycheck a credit to get you to buy something that you wouldn't buy without the credit? We should let the market dictate what car you want. That's common sense. If you like your electric vehicle, cool, figure out how to, in South Carolina, you'd have to figure out how to get it charged on the way out of the hurricane. That's what we call a crisis. So you have to make sure that the American people want what it is that you're trying to sell them. And if they don't want it, they ought not have to buy it. And you should not create a perverse incentive to force people to get something or to reconsider something they actually don't want. There's no common sense in that. And so one of the first things you do as President of the United States is you rescind the Inflation Reduction Act. Just take away the tax credits that come for electric vehicles. You also, by the way, by rescinding the Inflation Reduction Act, you eliminate 87,000 new positions in the IRS. Maybe we could put that money on our border, close our southern border with those resources, double our patrol agents down there, give them a little more pay, more incentive, more overtime, and not have 87,000 people to come look in our accounts to see if we're tax cheats.
Senator, we've talked about a number of issues already. Let me turn your attention now to another domestic issue. One of the number one concerns we hear from our small business members, especially this time of year in renewal season, is that the cost of healthcare coverage keeps going up and up and up, and it is harder and harder and harder for our businesses to afford that coverage. That, after now I think entering a second decade of Obamacare with the promise of lowering costs, hasn't worked. How does the Scott administration address rising healthcare costs in America?
Well, Gentry, you probably know the answer. One of the things that you and I probably both agree upon is that anytime there's a monopoly, prices go up, quality goes down. And what Obamacare has brought in is the acceleration of a healthcare monopoly where the federal government pays over somewhere around $2.3, $2.5 trillion of healthcare costs are paid for by the federal government. That's really close to getting to a monopoly. When Obamacare was passed, 2010, I got to tell you, the devastation in South Carolina somehow is going to lower costs and make healthcare more accessible. One of the few, mostly unknown consequences was the closure of rural hospitals across the country. The devastation can be reversed by reintroducing competition into healthcare. We need to make sure that we encourage more competition across the state lines, more opportunities for small businesses to have an association plan. We've seen those reduce the cost of healthcare between 20 and 23 or 25%. Having catastrophic coverage available for those who are young. I remember I used to sell health insurance when I was a kid, about 23 years old, but I didn't have health insurance. I felt like the only chance I ever was going to have for needing health insurance was to have a catastrophic occurrence. Well, having catastrophic coverage for people who are too young to afford to want to buy the health insurance, making that coverage available is really helpful. The competition across the state lines, 10 to 16% reduction in the cost of health care. They came up with something called medical loss ratios, MLRs, medical loss ratios, that said you can't use a certain percentage for commission and another percentage for administration. Anytime you get the federal government messing with the private sector, typically the private sector, i.e. me and you, we lose. So getting the government out of trying to figure out how to run stuff, they don't run stuff really well. So eliminating that will reduce the cost of healthcare, bring more competition to the market, and I believe you'll have a higher quality of healthcare with a lower cost.
Very good. One of the fastest rising areas in healthcare costs are prescription drugs. And we find this matter of pharmacy benefit managers or PBMs.
I almost said the devil, but that's probably too hyperbolic.
You know, it's an extraordinary time in American politics because it's one of those places where it seems that leaders in both parties agree that the cost and complexity that they introduce, the cost that they drive through artificial complexity is inappropriate, and yet nobody's been able to get anything done. How does President Scott turn that around?
You just have to put the spotlight on what the PBMs don't do. Well, PBMs, pharmaceutical benefit managers, is a fancy way of saying a middleman. They add to the price of drugs, and they add no value to that increased price. So if you eliminate that middleman, the prices of the drugs go down. And here's the other incredibly awkward truth. Too often, the final arbiter, the final person who sets the price of the drug isn't the drug company, it's the PBMs. Because they're negotiating with the health insurance companies to figure out what the price should be. That ought not be. It's number one. Number two, the faster we get through the process to get a drug to the market, the cheaper that drug is. With innovation in the healthcare space, we are now able to detect the anomalies through quantum computing. We'll be able to detect the anomalies that will help us to accelerate to getting that drug to the market with fewer unnecessary reactions that they can figure out faster. That will also reduce the time, which means it gets to the market faster, and that will be cheaper. The faster it gets to the market, the cheaper it is. Eliminate the PBMs, the better it is. And then we've all had, both left and right, conversations about limiting the out-of-pocket expense, especially for our senior citizens.
Senator, we're on a roll here. Thank you for watching the clock as we are.
I better talk slower.
No, you're doing fine.
Yes, sir.
What we pay in taxes has come up a couple times tonight, and the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, some of those elements start to expire in 2025. That's around the corner.
Yes.
A simple, fair, affordable tax plan is a prerequisite for growth. I think you agree with that.
Absolutely.
So how would you approach tax policy as TCJA expires? And then how would you bring Congress along, other than getting a Republican Congress?
Yes, you have to fire some people in Congress in order to get it done.
Yeah.
I'm happy to work on that. So one of the things I'd say is that in 2025, you'll see about $2.4 trillion on the personal side of the tax code. Those expire. The corporate taxes were made permanent. We only had 51 Republicans at the time, and it required us to get all of us to vote for something. You're watching the House, and you can see how hard that is to get all Republicans. Can we pray for ourselves, please? God, help those people in the House. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm not even kidding, by the way. It's embarrassing. It's truly embarrassing. I'd go a step further. Getting 51 senators to do something was really difficult. I had the privilege of talking my colleagues into supporting the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act because we got no Democrats, not a single Democrat vote. And in the Senate, in order to get something done, you need 60 votes, except for this thing called reconciliation, which is just another way of saying you can do tax things with 51 votes or a simple majority. But when you do it with just a simple majority, it expires and the expiration is into 2025. If I were president, I would make the personal side of the tax code permanent. I would create a red wave so that we would have a majority in the Senate so that we can have a permanence on the personal side of the tax code. That's the way you start. The second thing you do, I created something called opportunity zones, where we've seen about $75 billion, not a single tax dollar, all personal dollars, with the incentive coming into some of the hard-hit economic areas. I would help relocate factories that left our country. You come back to America, you go into an opportunity zone, we'd give you a 30% cut off your profits. By doing so, I believe we would create those 4 to 6 million new jobs in manufacturing.
I shared this with you several years ago when we first met, and this is an aside, but I happened to be in the Senate chamber with my teenage son after you became a senator and gave your maiden speech. And the buzz was, Senator Scott's going to give his first speech. You might want to sit in the gallery and watch it. We did. I have no recollection of what you talked about, but you did it really well.
Thank you, sir. Typically, the less you remember about what I say, the more you like it. So I really appreciate that very much.
So
Just joking.
Let's stay on tax, okay?
Yes,
as you talk about tax policy and what the next president will do, and hopefully the right way, we have to think about a $32 going on $33 trillion debt. It may have rolled to 33 since this question was written.
It's 33 now. Yes, sir.
And our debt to GDP ratio is now over 100%, 101 going to 102. How in the heck do we deal with that problem before it's too late?
One of the most important considerations when you think about tax policy is that people will tell you that when you lower taxes, you lower revenues to the federal government. Some of us will say that might be a good thing. But the truth is that, anybody old enough to remember Ronald Reagan? Someone say praise the Lord. So one of the things that Ronald Reagan proved through his economist, a guy named Art Laffer, who crafted this thing called the Laffer curve, was that if you lower taxes, your revenues actually grow. That's been proven time and time again. It was proven in the 1930s when they had the Mellon tax cuts. Taxes were cut, spending kept growing. Revenue went up though, but the revenue did not go up as fast as the spending went up. JFK cut taxes in the 60s. And what happened? Revenue went up. We all know the Reagan Revolution and tax cuts in the 80s. Well, 2017, when we finished writing the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, taxes went down $2.4 trillion, which means that people have more money. When people have more money, fortunately, people spend. And when they spend, they create a stronger economy. When you have a stronger economy, revenue to the government goes up. So the result of the 2017 tax cuts at the end of 2018 was 3% increase in revenue. 2019, another 3% increase in revenue, and then COVID hit. Right on time. Thank you all very much. This is perfect. Okay, so the truth is that there is a way for us to cut taxes and to get more revenue to the government. But the other part that's really important is that if we do not control spending, you will not see the benefits of more money to the Treasury. That's what happened in the 30s, in the 60s, in the 80s, and we're looking at it again now. We have $33 trillion worth of debt, which means that our interest-only payment this year is right around $572 billion. And it won't touch a penny of the principal. The only way to turn that around is to grow our economy and to reduce our spending. We have to do both if we want to see our national debt go down. But under President Joe Biden, he has set a budget at 40% more spending than we're taking in. That's unconscionable.
Right.
Yes, you could fix that pretty quick by simply having a balanced budget that requires us to live within our means. Goes a long way.
I'll do one more and then
Yes,
bounce
sir.
back over to Gentry. You're talking about deficits. One other big deficit's our trade deficit. 1 trillion, that's going up. And over a fourth of that, $284 billion, is with China. That's risky. That's scary. What are the best options for dealing with the trade deficit?
Well, I think there's two really important points there. We currently have tariffs against China because China, in my opinion, to be simple, lie, cheat, and steal. Therefore, you can't make a good deal with a bad actor. They still have not yet met their goals as it relates to the ag that they were buying from our country. They just haven't done it. So trying to fix that problem really has to do with what they sell that is cheap, that we want. Part of that trade deficit is created because there are things, clothing and other items that are really inexpensive over there that we keep buying over here. If we were to tackle the problem of supply chain and become more focused on supply chain resiliency, we would find ourselves in the strongest position to make those items here. And if we use the innovation economy, we can make it for a lower price point than most of us would imagine. So it's one of the ways to deal with that actual trade deficit. The other way to do it is to make sure that we continue to create more deals with more countries that allow our goods to get into their markets. We are a free market economy, so people come to our market with no headwinds. We could suggest that maybe there's unique aspects, like some trucks, because we protect our truck market here, have a little bit of a headwind called a tariff. But for the most part, we are a free market economy. But we also do business in a lot of countries where they do not give us the same benefit that they get from our market. If you want to rebalance that situation, you have to actually allow for our goods to get into those markets in the same way that their goods get into our market.
Senator, let me turn your attention now to regulatory policy with maybe just a brief story. 1996, Bill Clinton was president and famously declared the era of big government over, right? I'm going to tell you, I think that's the last time the two major parties agreed that we had too much federal government, because certainly Republicans thought we had too much. The day he said that, we had 9,200 federal regulations on the books, 9,200 federal regulations on the books in 1996. Every single year since, we've had at least 3,000 new regulations that take effect every year, Republican and Democratic presidencies. And today, there are 120,000 regulations that weigh down this economy and, frankly, I think impede American free enterprise. What does a Scott administration do to start to rein in the size and cost and complexity of these federal regulations that sit on the shoulders of American entrepreneurs?
That's a great question, Gentry. And the short answer is we've had a tenfold increase since the Clinton years. And our economy is not 10 times safer, 10 times better. It is slower.
Amen.
And part of the things that we can't really measure from a tax perspective is the slow growth in the private sector, because you cannot compete against your own government. When an entrepreneur has to pay higher taxes or pay more fees, fees are just another way of saying we can compel you to pay something. It might as well be called a tax. They call it a fee because it sounds nicer or something. But in the end, all that regulatory burden comes in the form of less money for the entrepreneur to invest in his business, her employees, or the equipment that she needs. I've been the co-sponsor of something called the REINS Act. The REINS Act, I'm sure you're familiar with it.
Oh, yes.
The REINS Act basically says when there is an economic impact in our economy more than $100 million, you should have to go back and reevaluate everything and then eliminate some of the duplicative regulatory parts of it. In my opinion, that is a great first step. But the leap in the right direction is when you have a president who comes into office and simply says this: it is my responsibility to rescind regulation. Not just to not add to regulation, but to reverse regulation and to reduce the regulatory environment. A classic example, I always say when someone says something that provocative, see what they've already done. Because everybody's going to tell you what they're going to do in the future. I always say go back and look at the record at what they've already done in the past, and it will tell you whether the past is foreshadowing the future, or maybe they're just talking a little hogwash. Well, I led the efforts as a part of the Banking Committee in 2018 to reform the Dodd-Frank Act, we were able to get that done, which reduced the hurdles for banks to lend money to the private sector to create a stronger economy.
Including for small businesses.
Indeed. And that was very impactful. Today, the exact opposite's happening. The Federal Reserve, which needs a whole lot of help, Michael Barr, the Vice Chairman of Supervision, wants to increase the capital standard. By doing so, you have less money to loan out. Why not have a regulatory reset in the rest of the departments that we oversee as President of the United States and cut and rescind unnecessary and duplicative bureaucracy and regulations? We saw recently the EPA had a lawsuit. It was the EPA versus West Virginia. That kind of action, West Virginia won, reins in the bureaucracy. The CFPB is getting ready to have the same fate, which will rein in the bureaucracy. This is really good for the average small business owner because you'll have fewer hurdles to get over to start your business. Hopefully you'll have more access to money to start your business, and you won't have to pay more money in bureaucracy. Instead, you can pay more money to your employees.
Senator, I've got time for one more question
before
the important people have a chance to spend a little bit of time with you. But before I do that, I want to take a moment to thank our host tonight.
Absolutely.
Vermeer is one of the great success stories in Iowa, in America. You see here a little bit of a sample of what they make, and they ship all over the world. Started two companies actually, one acquired by Vermeer. Vermeer itself started right here in Iowa, and but for the kinds of principles that you've talked about tonight, wouldn't be here, wouldn't be the economic engine that it is, wouldn't be the job creator or the innovator that it is. And so I want to thank not only you for being here, I want to thank the folks at Vermeer for opening their doors to it. Now, Senator, if I can conclude with this question for you. We've talked about a lot of issues tonight, and I'm sure there are some we didn't get to. But let me ask you this. 4 years from now, you're running for re-election. You're asking the American people for a second term. What should they expect? How should they measure you? How will our lives be better after 4 years of your presidency?
Quickly, promises made, promises kept. That's how you measure the success of a public servant. What did you promise to do? And what did you actually get accomplished? One of the first things you should do on day one is sign the XL Keystone Pipeline. Get that going. Let's create tens of thousands of new jobs and a lot of new energy. Number two, let's focus on education because CRT versus ABC is an easy fight for me. Actually, right, that's very good. Okay, didn't know that would do that. Eliminating indoctrination and getting back to education. These are the promises that I've made. I have a Parents' Bill of Rights. Go to votetimscott.com. Take a look at some of the policy positions and then measure my success as your servant based on what I told you I was going to do.
Senator, what a joy to have you here. Thank you for being with us. Absolutely. If you're interested in what you've heard tonight, votetimscott.com or amfreechamber.com. Senator, thank you. Do we? We've got a couple of questions.
Okay, I'll take really quick questions. Really quick questions. Anybody have a question? Yes, sir.
Term limits.
Absolutely. I term limited myself. I hope to be your next president, but if I'm not, this is my last term in the Senate. Oh, no. I like the way y'all talk. Move y'all to South Carolina. Yes, sir.
How can we get this problem fixed with the Republicans fighting?
Yeah.
Because if they keep going, we're going to lose the president.
Yeah. The short answer is we need to do our fighting behind closed doors. Yes. The Democrats do it. They are in lockstep on election day. We should figure out, have your fights behind closed doors. Don't let the world watch the dysfunction. The sausage making is always ugly. Do it behind closed doors so we can win back the White House, win back the Senate, and expand the majority in the House, and don't make rules that are almost impossible to live by. Giving 4% of the House the right to rule the 96% is un-American.
Let me say one more time, votetimscott.com.
Yes, sir.
Votetimscott.com.
Thank you.
Or amfreechamber.com, and thank you, Senator.
Absolutely. Appreciate y'all.